8 select lawmakers from the House and Senate on the breach of sovereignty by Communist China's stratospheric balloon. A large white balloon able to fit 3 massive buses in it entered the United States airspace on January 28th. Detected and tracked by U.S. intelligence officials, it still was able to travel from Alaska to Montana and hover above America's most important military installations, all the way to South Carolina, until the Pentagon shot it down on Saturday after more than a week traveling throughout the country. Now, questions are swirling on the damage already done. What did the balloon capture? Was it sending data back live as it traveled back to Communist China? Did it drop and disperse surveillance products powered by solar energy to allow unlimited surveillance? And why did it take U.S. officials so long to shoot it down? Was it a test for the CCP to see if it can send something into America's airspace undetected? And how much surveillance is Communist China performing on America right now? Joining me right now is the chairman of the newly formed Select Committee on China, Wisconsin representative, former Marine, spending 2 tours in Iraq, Mike Gallagher. Congressman, thank you so much for being here this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Your reaction to this balloon, first and foremost.
Well, letting a Chinese surveillance balloon lazily drift over America is like seeing a robber on your front porch and inviting him in, showing him where you keep your safe, where you keep your guns, where your children sleep at night, and then politely asking him to leave. It makes no sense. It makes us look weak and flat-footed on the world stage. Furthermore, if these Bloomberg reports are true, that the Biden administration deliberately tried to keep the American people in the dark so as to salvage Secretary Blinken's trip to Beijing, that's unacceptable. Allowing this to happen in order to preserve a photo op with Xi Jinping, who's committing genocide, that's foreign policy malpractice. And let's assume that the balloon was mostly harmless or we neutralized it. Do we think that the timing was coincidental? It's far more likely that they deliberately timed this in order to send a message as Blinken was preparing for his trip. And the message is, look what we can do to you and get away with. Your corporations, your career politicians, they will come crawling back. And so the message I have for the Biden administration is, don't fall for the Chinese Communist Party charm offensive. It's a farce. It's a bedtime story they tell out-of-touch global elites at Davos. It's time to push back before it's too late, before something far more dangerous than a balloon is flying over American territory.
It's absolutely outrageous. I spoke with a former pilot of an F-22 over the weekend, and he said that when there was one situation that he was actually present for, when a Syrian ship went into Turkey, the Turkish officials shot it down 1.5 miles into the country, 17 seconds. They had to be tracking this even as it entered America, correct?
100% correct. And if it was being tracked over the Aleutian Islands in Alaska, we absolutely could have taken it down without fear of debris or harm to civilians on the ground. And if we don't have the capability to neutralize it, corral it, collect it, look under the hood and exploit it, well, that's a capability we need to develop with our $850 billion defense budget, because I suspect this isn't the last time we're going to see a Chinese probe. There's other things we need to do here, Maria. We need to kick PLA-affiliated researchers off American universities. We need to make sure that CCP affiliates can't buy land next to sensitive military bases in America. And we need to shut down what are effectively CCP police stations here on American soil. This is unacceptable. We need to defend American sovereignty.
And I know these are things that you have been working on as chairman of the newly formed China Select Committee. I want to talk about that because it seems that you are up an uphill battle here with regard to corporate America. I mean, you have investment funds right now as we speak. You've got the Thrift Fund, which is the 401k for government employees investing in Chinese companies. You've got a ton of ETFs and index funds. You've also got pension funds investing in the very companies that are tied to the CCP that may turn around and turn their armament and guns on America. Your thoughts on what you can do and accomplish with this new committee?
Well, the message I have for corporate America or Wall Street who want to continue sort of business as usual with China is that we should not be in the business of funding communist genocide. And we certainly should not be in the business of funding our own destruction by sending money to Chinese military affiliated companies. So I understand this is complex. I understand that for over 2 decades, we've pursued China's global integration into the world economy, and it did not moderate their behavior. And I understand that this thing is not going to change on a dime, but there are sensible things we need to do to reclaim our economic independence. Maria, imagine if we found ourselves in a kinetic confrontation with China over Taiwan, and they cut off the export of advanced pharmaceutical ingredients, as they threatened to do in the early stage of the pandemic in order to plunge us into a sea of coronavirus, was the phrase that they used. Yeah. Would we be able to deter? This is about defending ourselves from aggression. So we are going to have to find a way to onshore the production of key goods that we can't afford to depend on China for, such as microelectronics, such as rare earths, as well as ensure that we are not unwittingly or wittingly funding our own destruction.
Well, you also have America's premier venture capital fund, Sequoia, arguably run by a communist Chinese leader. Your thoughts on Sequoia?
Well, Sequoia is incredibly concerning, and on the select committee, we're obviously going to be looking into that. We're building kind of an investigative team right now, and there's some good work that's been done in past Congresses that hasn't seen the light of day yet that we're hoping to build upon. But the bottom line is this: people don't understand the way in which the Chinese Communist Party uses something called United Front work to corrupt our domestic institutions. United Front work is this combination of intelligence operations and influence operations and economic coercion that they use to buy off foreign elites and promote stories that help the Communist Party and eliminate stories that hurt the Communist Party. We need a massive strategy for countering United Front work, because it's not just Sequoia, it's not just various asset managers, it's American universities, it's other educational institutions across the board for too long mission to go forward. And that's what we're going to have to tackle on the select committee on the Chinese Communist Party.
Well, you mentioned universities. An anonymous Chinese person donates almost $60 million to the University of Pennsylvania. And then Penn is able to shut down the China Initiative, which was the very vehicle that the U.S. was using to announce a string of indictments for those people who were involved in surveillance and stealing intellectual property. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it reveals the broader problem here, which is that too many American universities are desperate for CCP money. The Trump administration started enforcing something called Section 117 of the Higher Education Act, which requires disclosure of gifts in excess of $250,000. And what did they discover? $6.5 billion worth of previously undisclosed donations. And then when the Biden administration came into office, suddenly those disclosures stopped. So either the Chinese money spigot turned off, which is highly unlikely, or they're simply not enforcing that section of the law. And then when you dig into these individual gifts, invariably you find a connection to the United Front Work Department or some CCP official tied to that money. It comes with strings attached. So we have to enforce the law. We have to eliminate Confucius Institutes. And a lot of the Confucius Institutes, amidst previous crackdowns, simply rename themselves to get away from the scrutiny. We have to protect our academic freedom and our students, particularly Chinese students, from transnational repression by the Chinese Communist Party.
Congressman, what are your thoughts? Was this a trial balloon to see what capabilities America has as China starts coming up with its specific plan to go into Taiwan? There has been open source reporting that China will invade Taiwan within the coming 18 months. We've spoken in the past, and you said that 2024 is a year you're looking at. Why?
2024, I think, is really when the window of maximum danger picks up because of two reasons. One, there's an election in Taiwan in January of 2024. I think when the DPP wins that election, Xi Jinping will conclude he cannot take Taiwan via political warfare, so we'll have to consider actual kinetic warfare. And then the other thing that's happening in 2024 is we'll have our own presidential election here in the United States, and that's going to be a knockdown, drag-out fight. We're going to be politically distracted. Perhaps a third variable playing into this is we have a lot of big defense bills that are coming due, and that's why some of the plans we've seen from the Biden administration make no sense. They're trying to bottom out the United States Navy, our priority force in the priority theater, right at the time when China is gearing up for warfare. So the reality is we don't know when and if Xi is going to launch an invasion, but we have to move with a sense of urgency. We have to move heaven and earth to arm Taiwan to the teeth because we don't want Taiwan's future to become Ukraine's present.
Should we be responding to the CCP putting police stations throughout the world, including New York City?
We absolutely should. We should shut these things down. And this isn't some crazy right-wing conspiracy theory. I mean, this is the New York Times reported on these effectively CCP police stations.
Yeah.
The FBI director has signaled his concerns. But my question is, what are we actually doing about it? We are hoping on the Select Committee to really dig into this because these are instruments for repressing people on our soil, surveilling citizens on our soil. It's a direct infringement of our sovereignty.
Totally extraordinary. Congressman, thanks very much for your leadership. We'll be watching a very important work. Thanks very much, Mike Gallagher in Wisconsin. Thank you, sir.
Place and then why it took so long to shoot this down.
Thank
you, sir.
Work together and where we are opposition.
Thank you, sir.
Sometimes very hard to hear the president in these type of situations with Marine One whirring away in the background here. But he said it was always his intention that that balloon from China should be shot down and that he made clear to China what the U.S. would do about that balloon. We just don't know when he did make that clear. Bottom line is it's been shot down and pieces of it.
Some information piece by piece, but that's not likely going to be enough for both Democrats and Republicans, as they, of course, have an oversight duty to figure out why this happened, why this came into our U.S. airspace in the first place, and then why it took so long to shoot this down. They have their own questions. In fact, tomorrow we've got a House Armed Services Committee hearing that was already previously scheduled on the China threat. I am told that there are going to be a number of members on this committee that are going to ask about this spy flight. Meanwhile, Democrat Senator John Tester from Montana, he is a chairman of Defense Appropriations, Neil. He has actually already called for a hearing to find out why decisions were made when they were. He says he has faith in our military officials, but he's got to hold them accountable. He's got to conduct oversight and try to figure out why those decisions were made. Meantime, Senate Intel Chairman Mark Warner tweeting his frustration as well over the weekend. He said there's no way the CCP would allow a balloon like this to fly over the Chinese heartland. Now, we are expecting, as you mentioned, the Gang of Eight to be briefed this week. It could even happen before the State of the Union address tomorrow night. And then next week, all senators are going to also get a briefing, a more generalized briefing on the China threat.